first, we'll support any type of loans, like any type of thing that is debt financing will be supported on Morpho. As a broker, you have to connect yourself with like different sources of capital.
Sort of like you need this horizontal infrastructure layer that kind of abstracts all the
100%.
crypto complexity. So this is a new thing we're doing where when there's news in the portfolio, we're talking about the news with the founders directly. So Paul, there's big news. A lot of news, like a steady trickle of news actually out of Morpho. Every day there's some news. I think yesterday you guys announced the biggest bank in France, Société Générale, is integrating Morpho for their lending book. Just a couple weeks ago, Coinbase integrated all the USDC on their platform with Morpho. And earlier this week, you launched Vaults V2. And so I want to talk about Vaults V2 and everything else I just mentioned. But before we get into it, I would provoke you to say, like, you've been very vocal about the DeFi Mullet thesis. And I think all the things I just mentioned are proof that it's working. So maybe we could set the stage with that. Like, what is the DeFi Mullet thesis? And then we'll talk about how all these integrations are proving it out.
Sure. So I guess very simply, the DeFi Mullet is just about enshrining Web3 tech in a way that's completely hidden to the user. Like, how do we reach Web2 level UX, like feature parity when it comes to like clicking buttons and waiting time, latency? Like, people don't need to set up a wallet. They don't need to think about chain, about gas, like any of that. So just like what they're used to today, but they get the power of Web3 infrastructure behind the scenes, right? So DeFi Mullet is all about hiding the wires in some way, but powering those financial services with a DeFi core. And as a result, allowing for much better products, whether it means much deeper liquidity because you go global connectivity through blockchain networks, or better pricing because you have much more open competition, or much broader offerings because those protocols are permissionless and you have like a lot of like competition into building new types of products. And so DeFi is about that, like bringing DeFi to the user in the way that the user does not even know it's DeFi behind the scenes.
Cool, and I'm gonna ad-lib a little bit, right? So historically, DeFi has been used by crypto natives. My simple take on the DeFi Mullet thesis is now DeFi can be used by everybody, right? And then it'll be invisible, right? So that means anywhere there's a digital account balance in a fintech app, in a bank, it can be plugged into the chain, it can be plugged into Morpho.
Yes, I think that's fair. And I think my take on this is that wherever we see distribution, like any form of distribution that is in some way financialized, you'll have a way to earn yield with it. Whether it's like a social media app that enshrines a wallet, you'll have yield for it. Whether it's like, you know, merchant accounts that you have, you'll earn yield for it, etc. And so it's also super easy, frankly, to integrate those like DeFi infrastructure once you have the account abstraction stack that is mature as it is today. It's like some of those integrations like are literally take less than a day for those like large enterprises to effectively like build in like a yield solution for their users.
The last episode of this we did was with Brennan, the CEO and founder of Phantom, and their news was announcing Cash, a stablecoin that they built with Stripe and Bridge. And what's really interesting about Cash is it passes on doesn't directly pass on, but it rewards developers who integrate Cash, the stablecoin, with yield. And that yield is presumably, it's coming indirectly from the treasury yields that are backing the stablecoin. You know, when I think about something like Cash, right, and the future of stablecoins, all stablecoins are probably going to have some kind of yield being passed through. And the yield, in my view, is going to come from two places. One is the underlying treasuries, that's what Cash has. And two is the on-chain yield. And so the way I've been conceiving of this is, you know, there's the risk-free rate, the US Treasury yield, and then increasingly there's going to be the on-chain rate. And in my view, Morpho is the way to access the on-chain rate, right? The yields that you can earn on-chain. And that's like what all these integration partners coming for the DeFi Mullet thesis are after.
I think that's completely fair. And when you look at like the Coinbase integration that we done, like they already had this sort of yield path through like feature that was earning users like 4%. And now they get to integrate the DeFi side of things, which gets their user to earn like 6, 7, 8% through those on-chain rails. And they don't even have to pass through the yield anymore because it's earned through.
Right.
So there's also like a thing for Coinbase where it's much more interesting in their case. And I would go even as far as saying that eventually we'll see the merger of the two where like at the end of the day, the risk-free rate of those stablecoins are effectively state bonds that are underlying like the stablecoins. And, you know, I hope that one day in the not too far future, we see those bonds effectively being minted on chain directly. And as a result of that, a stablecoin is effectively just a Morpho vault that aggregates a bunch of state bonds, right? And provides the users a way to access those like in some sort of like liquid easily transferable ways. So I would go even as far as saying that in the future, like all type of yield, even this sort of like risk-free bonds type of things will go on chain.
It'll be on chain as part of a Morpho vault. Okay, well that's a great setup. You just launched Vaults V2. That was the news this week. Tell us about what's changing, what's different.
So Morpho Vaults V1 was really the 0 to 1 of like, hey, we want to externalize the risk management from the core protocol. Like we as a lending protocol don't want to be the one issuing the loans. We want specialized players, asset managers, to be issuing those loans on immutable markets, right? And then they can trade those loans on immutable markets, and you have this ecosystem of vault managers that look for new risk in new Morpho markets and manage risk across a wide variety of markets. That really, like a year and a half ago, like the vault curation thing was not even a thing. Like it did not exist as a concept, and we introduced that, and today we have like 30 different vault managers which are making $25 million per year in revenue, which is quite significant. And now we have all those institutional players looking at this and are being super interested at what this concept is. But I guess we have two main problems with Vault V1. The first problem is that Morpho is not just going to be about those lending markets that exist today. We have a very complete roadmap of type of loans and markets that we want. And Vault V1 could only deposit into certain type of over-collateralized variable rate loans, right? Mm-hmm. And what Vault V2 enables is to be able to deposit into any type of loan. And as a result, it sort of like prepares for the future where if we release like new types of markets, well, Vault V2 will be able to access those markets, right? So the first key thing is thus that vaults are general. They can essentially aggregate any form of obligations, on-chain loans, etc. The second key thing is that over the last 6 months, we talked a lot to institutions and realized like what were their key requirements in order to be able to do large scale asset management on chain. And not talking about like, hundreds of millions or billions like we have today on Morpho, but literally like trillions, right? Some of those requirements are fairly different from what you currently have in like the Vault DeFi space. And those requirements included being fully non-custodial, like effectively not being capable of taking control of the assets. So we had to build the engine like not only general, but fully on-chain and with a reward system that's fully on-chain, etc. And most importantly, like being capable of knowing your users more. Morpho Vaults come up with like a very feature complete like gating system to be able to introduce like any gating requirement that you may have within the vault in itself. There's a ton of other features around like risk management, etc., but those are like more technical for the vault managers themselves.
Okay, so I'm gonna just spit that back to summarize. So the main thing is, number one, vaults, when you introduce them in Morpho Blue, change the game on lending marketplaces by inviting third-party risk curators to manage the risk in the lending marketplace. And we can compare this to kind of the first iteration of lending protocols on chain, things like Compound and Aave, which had risk managed by governance, right? There was one kind of central manager of all the risk across the lending marketplace with both Aave and Compound. So the big innovation was we're gonna make it a free market. No longer is it gonna be permissioned by governance. Anyone can launch any market and manage their own risk. And the result, you got all these curators. Now, curators can do more, right? Like they can, instead of allocating capital just to Morpho lending markets, they can allocate it to any vault that conforms to the standard. Just to be clear, does that include vaults that may not be lending?
Right, so Vault V2 is effectively an asset management stack that's very modular, and you have different categories of vaults inside that. You have what we call the basic vault, which essentially is a vault that could deposit into anything. Mm-hmm. It could deposit into a RWA, it could deposit into like non-Morpho markets.
Could a vault curator decide I want to be an LP in a like Uniswap turn?
Yes, that could be something. Mm-hmm. And then we have what we call a Morpho Vault V2, which is specifically built for Morpho's lending markets, existing lending markets, but also future lending markets, on which we've put like a lot of effort with regard to like having a fully integrated experience, security audit, etc. Because on the basic vault side of things, obviously like you can't assume anything about what you're putting in the vault, so it makes it much harder to develop, etc. Mm-hmm. So this is more like of an open source like public good that we're like sort of giving for anyone in order to become the standard with Vault V2, right? And so we already have like an insane amount of demand from like people that have nothing to do with Morpho, that just want to aggregate things on chain and create essentially their funds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when you think about it, a vault is really a fund, but
Right.
built on chain. And so those people are just essentially using the factory, building their own vault, doing things that have nothing to do with Morpho, right?
Right.
And then if you want to build specifically like a book of loans, then you configure it as a Morpho vault, in which case you have additional guarantees and also like access to Morpho's network effect in general, Morpho's brand, like you get distributed in our app, in our vault management app, our API, like those type of things.
I want to take it full circle now back to where we started when we were talking about stablecoins and combining the risk-free rate of US Treasury yields with the on-chain rate of DeFi. It sounds like vault managers are going to be able to curate yield of any kind, including, on-chain treasuries, on-chain RWAs, including crypto-native yields, potentially being an LP in a AMM or whatever strategy they want, right? And so the result is like you'll be able to package up all the yield on chain and serve it to the customer. So I think that's really powerful, right? And that's where you've been seeing integrations. You mentioned, this is what Coinbase is doing, right? With their USDC, now you're earning not only kind of the risk-free rate, but the potential to earn the on-chain yield as well by loaning out USDC on Morpho. So paint the picture for me, like 5-10 years down the road, like what does the world look like? Does every account balance earn a much higher yield than currently available via treasuries or otherwise?
I think eventually Morpho, so first we'll support any type of loans, like any type of thing that is debt financing will be supported on Morpho. So what that will create eventually is much stronger market efficiency, because anyone that has a need for financing will be able to meet much more easily like someone that has an excess of capital, right? Mm-hmm. Just because everything is open, you come up with your intent, instantly you have this huge competitive network of curators that are constantly looking for new risks that will quote you. And so that is just gonna 10x like the coverage of financing across the world, but also is going to just make everything more competitive, more liquid, etc. So what we can expect from those mechanisms is essentially the spread to compress a lot, and like bars to get much better terms, as well as lenders to get much better terms. So that's like on the quality of the product. Now in practice, what I think that's going to look like is that every single distributor, and as we were saying, like every person that has a financialized distribution will have its own vault. It will be a revenue generation opportunity for them to convert that distribution into like for example, generating yield for whatever the money the people have in their video games or in their like social app, etc. And you'll have a vault that's specifically configured for those users with the risk profile that they need, with the compliance profile of like whatever jurisdiction they're operating in. All of this accessing like those global like lending markets.
This is something that, in my view, is uniquely enabled by the vault structure, and specifically Vaults V2, because the modularity allows for customization. And we actually talked about this in one of our other internal videos that we shared outside, or our internal discussions that we shared outside, is like when a technology is somewhat nascent, blockchains and crypto, like you really want modularity so that third parties can come in and control the full customer experience, right? And that's exactly what we see happen. Coinbase is coming in and saying, I want these kind of risk parameters. I think it's Steakhouse, right, to curate the risk for my users. And maybe Societe Generale has their own, compliance obligations in France, and so they want that the ability to customize. So you see it in Morpho architecture, you see it in Ethereum's architecture with the modular roadmap, right? Robinhood building their own chain. They want full control all the way from the end user interface down to the underlying chain. And so the very modular approach of Vault is, I would say, what's enabling all these third-party integrators to come in.
And as Web3 founder, I think that's probably the most important topic to understand, is like, how do you enable modularity on your product? And also at the same time, how do you make sure you don't just become a code library?
Right.
And how do you make sure that this modularity is in service of a broader network that is creating value for the world and is empowering the network?
That brings me to the last topic I want to cover, which is value capture, right? So this is a great point. If you're allowing third parties to customize everything, where does Morpho capture value in the stack?
Right. So I think, founders have different approaches on this. I've seen some project being like ultra modular, and then they go BSL license and they say, hey, you can use my code base. You build your own network effect, fine. It's owned to you, but then you have to pay a license fee. I tend not to believe that much into this model for different reasons. I feel like people will get more and more confident in smart contract, and licenses in the blockchain world where all the code is open is essentially a SaaS business, and I don't believe that much in the long-term mode of SaaS businesses. Like protocols that have a business license like will be forked if they're very valuable, etc. So I think it's less so about doing this in the case of Morpho, but it's more so about connecting everybody to a same shared global state such that people are able to access the best possible opportunities by meeting the entirety of the rest of the world through Morpho. And so in Morpho, we have this double structure where we separate markets from vaults. Vaults are really the modular layer that allows for anyone to configure to whatever their needs are, their compliance needs, their risk needs, etc. And everybody has its own vault and it's open source and everybody can have its own version. But what's most interesting, what the core of the business is the Morpho network. It's like, okay, now that you have capital in your vault, you need to access a market. You need to meet borrowers, or you need, on the other side, you need to meet lenders. And you meet through the market structure. And this is the thing that is stateful and that essentially is an act of value creation of like connecting people that don't know each other in a multi-sided market. And this is where Morpho takes a fee.
Mm-hmm. I said that was the last thing, but one more is like Coinbase is probably the furthest along, makes sense, they're like the most crypto native organization, furthest along integrator so far. I first, like, let's just do an update, like what are the numbers on that look like? And then two, like what have you learned from Coinbase thus far, or, you know, about the DeFi Mullet thesis and how it's playing out, and how has it informed kind of the next steps for the project?
So maybe first, like the state of things with the Coinbase integration is that they first integrated this loan product, which is, I think today, like in less than 6 months, has driven like $1 billion in loans origination, which is insane. Like is really a lot. On the other end, they're integrated the earn side of it. So what's interesting now for Coinbase is that they're building this internal flywheel where they don't need to pay for their lenders and redistribute the treasuries because their other users, the borrowers, are themselves paying for their lenders. And most interestingly is that the more they get people to use the loans, the more interesting it becomes for people to come on the earn side of things.
Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, earn is like, so the two sides. On one side, if you have Bitcoin on Coinbase.com, you can borrow against it, right? You can take a loan of dollars against your Bitcoin. On the other side, the earn side, you can lend out dollars that you have on the platform and earn high interest rate, right? And so what you're saying is people who want to like earn on their dollars are actually the ones lending to the people who want to borrow against their Bitcoin.
Exactly. And obviously, like Coinbase is not the only one in the book. Like you have other people, and otherwise Coinbase would just do this in like a black box environment and with their own liquidity. But on top of that, they sort of like benefit from other players depositing. For example, Bitpanda is integrating with Morpho on Base, and so they participate in that book, or Ledger, or Trust Wallet, etc., etc.
Right. And the benefit of all these parties using the same infrastructure is their customers get better terms.
Exactly. Overall, you get deeper liquidity. You're capable of borrowing more because you're connected to more lenders and at a better rate. To the point where like Morpho's books are like really beating like any institutional rate book, where they have to do the work themselves of like, as a broker, you have to connect yourself with like different sources of capital. It's tough, right? You have to call everyone, like every time you need to quote, etc. Whereas in the Morpho open system, everybody gets to connect and you get access to the cheapest capital and the deepest liquidity.
I guess the final leg of this is like, so there's $1 billion of Bitcoin in Morpho today from Coinbase.com users. Is that right?
Something it's actually like 1.5 billion
1.5
Bitcoin
billion.
That originated $1 billion of USD loans.
Wow. Okay. And then the earn side of it, where Coinbase customers can lend out their dollars, that was announced just a few weeks ago. Like, how's it going so far?
I have to say, I didn't look into the numbers lately. I think it's like 100 million in like a week or so.
Yeah,
like pretty good.
It's pretty good for the first week, right? And I think the growth chart that I saw was pretty exponential. So it seems like very strong validation, right? If the mullet thesis is working. I guess, what have you learned from it? What is it informing in terms of what you do next?
A few things, like obviously this playbook is something we've replicated like a lot across different distributors. Like this morning we announced Crypto.com is gonna also integrate crypto-backed loans, similar to what Coinbase has been doing, or on the earn side as well. We announced Gemini. We announced onchain, which is like one of the largest banks in the world. I think the big question now is like, okay, most of those players were very crypto native. How do we get into okay, we're going to replicate the playbook. We're going to scale this. That's great. Now, how do we get less crypto native like distributors to get comfortable with this technology, which is a step even further?
Yep.
And how do we bring in like large scale institutions to transition? Because obviously Coinbase is very crypto native. So I wouldn't say like it's been easy for them to integrate Morpho. Like how do we plug this into like existing technology from like a much older fintech, for example, or much older bank.
Mm-hmm.
That's the next challenge for the DeFi Mullet, is like, how do we extend beyond crypto native people?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the way I see it is like crypto has to move away from being a vertical in those companies. So usually those companies are structured as they have a crypto vertical, shipping crypto products, etc. And in my opinion, it should move from being a vertical to a function across the organization, like almost like as a crypto engineering function or crypto go-to-market, like across all the org, such that you see crypto not as a product in itself. Well, usually when you think about it as a product, you think about it through the angle of speculation, trading, etc., but more as a technology provider. And we're getting there.
Yeah, that's very cool. I think sort of like you need this horizontal infrastructure layer that kind of abstracts all the
100%.
crypto complexity. I've kind of got a mullet going, and I think if I keep it going for like 2 or 3 more years, like it'll be perfectly timed with the DeFi Mullet, reaching its apex. So thanks for coming in and telling us about the news. It's super exciting.
Yeah, thanks for having me.